Picture this. You are standing in a muddy field in the Venezuelan countryside. It is 2018. A crowd of frantic, emaciated people surrounds a cow. They aren't farmers. They are teachers, engineers, and shopkeepers, and they are starving. In a scene that went viral across the globe, the crowd stones the cow to death with rocks and chunks of concrete, tearing it apart with their bare hands for meat. Now, pause. This is happening in the country that sits on top of 303 billion barrels of oil, the largest proven oil reserves on planet Earth. More than Saudi Arabia, more than the United States. By all economic logic, every person in that field should be a millionaire. They should be driving luxury cars on paved roads. Instead, they are hunting livestock with rocks. You are about to discover why everything you learned about national wealth is wrong. This isn't just a story about socialism or capitalism. It is a detective story about the greatest robbery in human history. It involves a prophecy about devil's excrement, a bus driver who became a dictator, and a diet so brutal it made an entire nation lose 24 pounds. Welcome to the Venezuela paradox. ACT1, the SETI-up. To understand the nightmare, we have to remember the dream. Rewind to the 1970s. If you walked the streets of Caracas then, you wouldn't smell burning trash or sulfur. You would smell expensive French perfume and gasoline fumes from V8 engines. Venezuela was known as Saudi Venezuela. It was the wealthiest country in South America. The Concorde supersonic jet flew directly from Paris to Caracas because the elite class was so flush with cash they could fly to France just for dinner. The local currency, the bolivar, was so strong that locals jokingly called cheap Miami appliances, "Tau me two, give me two." But beneath the glitz, a time bomb was ticking. There was a man named Juan Pablo Pérez Alfonso. He wasn't a revolutionary, he was a diplomat, the brilliant mind who actually founded OPEC. While everyone else was popping champagne over oil profits, he was terrified. In a quote that now sounds like a curse, he looked at the black gold flowing out of the ground and said, "It is the devil's excrement. We are drowning in the devil's excrement." He was the Cassandra of the Caribbean, and nobody listened. Why? Because the price of oil was high. The government didn't need to tax its citizens, so it didn't feel the need to listen to them. This is the first seed of the disaster, the resource curse. By the late 1980s, the party was ending. Oil prices dipped, poverty rose. The shiny skyscrapers of Caracas began to overlook growing slums or barrios clinging to the hillsides. The gap between the Concorde flying elite and the starving poor became a canyon. The tension snapped in 1989 with the Caracazo massive riots over gas prices that left hundreds dead. The streets of Caracas ran red. The sensory overload of gunfire and screaming sirens traumatized a generation. Out of this chaos, a savior emerged. He wasn't a politician, he was a paratrooper. He had a red beret, a booming voice, and a charisma that was almost electrical. To the poor, he was a messiah. He promised to take the oil wealth, the devil's excrement, and wash it clean by giving it to the people. In 1998, he was elected president. And initially, it seemed like he was right. He built clinics, he taught people to read, he gave the invisible poor a voice. But here's the kicker. To build his paradise, he needed total control. And to get total control, he had to destroy the one thing keeping the country alive. ACT2, Escalation, Chapter 1, The Brain Death. The year is 2002. The inciting incident that doomed Venezuela wasn't a law or a sanction, it was a whistle. After a failed coup attempt against him, Chavez decided to purge the state oil company, PDVSA. PDVSA was widely considered the NASA of oil, a world-class corporation run by the best geologists and engineers in the hemisphere. They were apolitical technocrats. Chavez went on live television, blew a whistle, and started reading names. "You're fired! You're fired! Get out!" he shouted, laughing as he destroyed careers in real time. In total, he fired 18,000 of the company's most skilled employees. He replaced them with political loyalists, People who wore red shirts and chanted slogans but knew absolutely nothing about extracting heavy crude oil. This is where it gets crazy. Imagine firing every doctor in a hospital and replacing them with your political campaign staff. The patients might survive for a week, maybe a month. But eventually, the machines will break and people will die. That is exactly what happened to the oil fields. Maintenance stopped, pipes rusted, accidents skyrocketed. But for a while, nobody noticed. Why? Because luck was on their side. Money didn't just rain on Venezuela, it flooded. The country took in roughly $1 trillion in revenue. That is a number so big it's hard to comprehend. It's enough to rebuild the entire Marshall Plan several times over. But instead of fixing the rusting pipes or investing in agriculture, the government spent it. All of it. They imported everything. Food from Brazil, medicine from Germany, toilet paper from the US. This is the classic economic trap known as Dutch disease. When you have so much oil money, your currency gets strong, making imports cheap and domestic production expensive. Venezuelan farms shut down because it was cheaper to buy beef from abroad. Factories closed. The country became a junkie, addicted to the needle of oil revenue. And the corruption? You won't believe the scale. A new class of billionaires emerged, known as the boligarchs, Bolivarian oligarchs. These were men with government connections who exploited the currency exchange rates. They would buy US dollars from the government for pennies, then sell them on the black market for a fortune. They bought jets, racehorses, and condos in Miami while claiming to build socialism. Rafael Ramirez, the man Chavez put in charge of the oil, became known as the oil czar. Billions of dollars simply vanished from the accounts. Chapter 3. The Trigger. Then came the law on fair prices. It sounds great, doesn't it? Fair prices. To win votes, the government decreed that basic goods had to be sold at rock-bottom prices. For example, they said a loaf of bread must cost 0.110. The problem? It cost the baker 0.20 to buy the flour, the yeast, and pay the electricity. The bakers pleaded, "We can't bake bread at a loss." The government called them traitors and seized the bakeries. They handed the keys to community collectives. But the collectives didn't know how to run a supply chain. They couldn't import flour. The result? The bakeries stood empty. This happened to milk. This happened to meat. This happened to medicine. In 2013, the government famously seized a toilet paper factory to ensure fair distribution. Within months, there was no toilet paper in the entire country. Chapter 4. The House of Cards collapses. He left the presidency to his vice president, Nicolás Maduro. Maduro was a former bus driver and union leader. He lacked Chávez's electric charisma and his military background. But he inherited a country that was rotting from the inside out. And then the universe pulled the rug out. In 2014, global oil prices crashed. They plummeted from $100 a barrel to under 40. The junkies' supply was cut off. The consequences were immediate and devastating. Venezuela had zero savings. They had destroyed their own agriculture. They had destroyed their manufacturing. And now, they had no money to import food. Chapter 5. The Hunger. This is when the Venezuela paradox became a horror story. Inflation spiraled out of control. We aren't talking about 10% or 20%. We are talking about 130,000%. Prices were doubling every 19 days. Imagine this. You walk into a cafe to buy a coffee. The price is 500 bolivars. You drink the coffee. When you ask for the check 20 minutes later, the price is now 800 bolivars. Eventually, the money became so worthless that artisans sat on street corners weaving handbags and hats out of the bills. The paper was literally worth more as a craft material than as currency. Then came the Maduro diet. Supermarkets became ghostly halls of bright lights and empty metal shelves. Sometimes, A truck would arrive with only one item, say 5,000 bottles of ketchup. People would stand in line for 12 hours just to buy ketchup because it had calories. In 2007, a university study found that the average Venezuelan living in poverty had lost 24 pounds, 11 kgs of body weight. Maduro's response? During a live national broadcast, while discussing the shortages, he pulled an empanada out of his desk drawer and took a massive bite. It was a moment of Marie Antoinette-level disconnect. Chapter 6. The Darkness. If hunger wasn't enough, the lights went out. Remember those 18,000 engineers fired in 2002? Well, the electrical grid was run by the same incompetent system. In March 2009, the Guri Dam, which supplies 80% of the country's power, failed. Picture the scene: Caracas, a metropolis of millions, plunged into total pitch-black darkness. No subway, no elevators, no water pumps. Without electricity, water couldn't reach the apartments. Desperate families flocked to the Guaya River, a sewage-filled, toxic waterway that runs through the city, to fill buckets for bathing. Hospitals became death traps. Surgeons operated by the light of cell phones. Neonatal units shut down. Babies died in the dark because their incubators turned off. The smell of the city changed. It began to smell of rotting meat as millions of refrigerators simultaneously failed. ACT3, Resolution and Modern Connection. Millions of people realized that hope was gone. They headed for the borders. At the Simón Bolívar International Airport, there is a famous floor with a colorful mosaic pattern by the artist Carlos Cruz Diez. For decades, it was a symbol of welcoming tourists. Now, it is the background for the saddest trend on social media, the feet photo. Venezuelans take a picture of their shoes on the mosaic before boarding a one-way flight, captioning it with goodbyes to the life they knew. Over 7.7 million people have fled Venezuela. That is roughly 25% of the population. It is the largest displacement crisis in the history of the Western Hemisphere, bigger than the Syrian refugee crisis at its peak. Many walked. They walked thousands of miles across the freezing Andes Mountains into Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador, wearing flip-flops and carrying their lives in trash bags. So, what is the ultimate lesson for us today? It is easy to look at Venezuela and blame socialism or imperialism, depending on your politics. But the truth is far more disturbing. Venezuela is a warning about fragility. It proves that resources do not equal wealth. Wealth is institutions. Wealth is the ability to bake bread without the government seizing your oven. Wealth is having experts run your power grid instead of political cronies. Modern parallels are everywhere. Look at Nauru, the island nation that got rich on phosphate, spent it all, and is now destitute. Look at the populist movements rising globally today. Leaders on both the left and the right who attack the press, fire the experts, the deep state, or saboteurs, and promise that they alone can fix it. Venezuela didn't collapse overnight. It was a slow drip of eroding norms, ignored warnings, and the intoxicating belief that it can't happen here. In 2020, in a final twist of irony, Venezuela, the country with the most oil in the world, had to import gasoline from Iran. Their refineries were so broken they couldn't process their own crude. The devil's excrement had finally drowned them. Today, the oil is still there, underground, waiting. But a country is more than what lies beneath its feet. It is its people, and the people are gone. Now, I have a challenge for you. Next time you hear a politician promising simple solutions to complex economic problems, or demonizing the experts who keep the lights on, think of the Guri Dam. Think of the 24 pounds lost. If you found this deep dive valuable, hit that subscribe button. We are chronicling the history that shapes our future, and you don't want to miss the next episode where we uncover how a single man in a basement saved the world from nuclear war. Then tell me in the comments, do you think a country with that much natural resource wealth can ever truly be a democracy? Or is the resource curse inevitable? Let's debate it below.